What is this? Where did it come from? This is not, It's exactly the sort of experience I had when I was about 12 years old. We had moved here and we were members of a small church, and through a member of the community we had found out about an 88-year-old woman who was being evicted from her home. This was because she had fallen one day, and after several days of laying on her floor, a neighbor recognized that she was in distress and needed help. The thing is, when the paramedics arrived at her approximately 800 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, they found that there wasn't enough space for them to get the gurney into the house. All she had was a body-width passage from the back door into the hall and into the one tiny bathroom. She had been sleeping right there in the hall. The whole rest of her house was filled, floor to ceiling, with stuff. That's really all I can describe it as. And so myself, my mother, and several others, including some folks from St. John's United Methodist Church in Maryville, Tennessee, rented a dumpster. Actually, I think the city provided the dumpster, and we provided the labor. And I'm not talking about one of those out behind the fast food restaurant dumpsters. I'm talking about one of those big, long, trailer-length, 18-wheeler construction dumpsters. We filled one of those every Saturday for 4 weeks with all of the things that we found in her house. But on this one particular day, my mother and I were cleaning out the kitchen and pantry. And I had been handed a cardboard box full of things that had previously been in this woman's pantry. And as I carried it out, I realized the bottom was starting to get a little bit squishy. And so I supported it with my hands and heaved the whole box into the dumpster. But not quite all of it got off of me and into the dumpster. So I went back inside the house to wash my hands and was going to use the kitchen sink, which we had now uncovered, only to discover that one of the other volunteers was in there with a coat hanger trying to unjam what turned out to be a dead rat in the drain pipe. So instead I went in the bathroom and washed my hands. But then I ventured back into the pantry, where I found a sight I've never seen since, and quite honestly hope I never see again. What I found in there was, years worth of canned goods and home jarred things that, because they couldn't be accessed, had sat in there and baked in the afternoon sun that came through the pantry window. So much so that several of the glass jars of canned items had over the years exploded, covering all of the shelves as they dripped down. This furthermore caused the tin cans, much like the cans up there on the altar, to completely disintegrate. Quite literally, you would grab a can and it would turn to red dust in your hand. Its entire contents long since evaporated. The can itself, complete dust. Now here's the interesting thing about this woman. She had spent her entire life, 40 plus years, as a missionary to the tiny island of Dutch Guiana. It's a southern Caribbean island not far off the coast of South America. And apparently, she had had an issue with keeping things all of her life. But as a missionary, she had nowhere to put much of anything, so it hadn't ever been a problem. But when she finally got too old and retired back to the States, she suddenly had a house which she felt needed to be full of all kinds of things, including 5 VCRs, numerous videotapes, but I kid you not a television in the house. Todd and Michelle, this one's going to make you bristle a little bit. 2 upright pianos, 5 couches, 6 beds. No way she could ever use any of that stuff. And yet she prized all of it as if it were a sacred treasure. So when we would come to the house on Saturdays, one of the neighbors would come over with her, and they would spend the entire 4 or 5 hours we were there, sitting on the front lawn with her, going through one box, while we shuttled box after box after box after box out the back door. Now, this was before the days when we had shows on A&E like Hoarders. This was before we understood hoarding as a disease of the mind and the body. Fundamentally, it comes down to a lack of feeling safe and secure. A belief that you're not going to have enough for the next day or the day after that. And it's so deeply ingrained in these people's bodies that they believe that they have to keep these things all around them all the time. So much so that they get to the point that they aren't even taking care of themselves. It is as much a mental illness as it is a spiritual one. And though this woman had been a missionary for all of her life, it seems she still struggled with letting go of these things and trusting that God was going to provide for her. And in fact, if she had just looked around, she would have seen that God had actually provided for her more bounteously than she possibly could ever have used in the life that she had remaining. What is this? Where did it come from? What am I supposed to do with it? That's food from God. You're supposed to eat it. Okay. So I say it that way because we hear the story of manna in the wilderness, and we know, because most of us have been to Sunday school, that it's a great story of God's provision for God's people in the desert at a time when they are a people without place, without land. They can't farm, they can't grow their own crops, and they're mostly surrounded by sand and rocks, not trees and grass. And so God provides for them this wonderful stuff on the ground, this manna, this bread from heaven. But think about it. How many of you, as children or have told your own children and grandchildren, don't eat stuff off the ground? Anybody? Yeah, right? I know I was told that. I didn't listen very much, and that may explain a few things. But here we have it. God provides for God's people by giving them food literally on the ground. They're wandering around in the desert, and God says every morning when you wake up, after the dew is gone but before the day is hot, go and pick up your food off the ground. Now, I think there are a couple of reasons why God provided the manna in this manner. The first is this. Even though the Israelites at this time were a people without a home, without a place, by forcing them to collect their food from the ground, God reminds them that that is the source by which they will be fed. It keeps them connected to the land, which will become so very important for them as they move into God's promise. After all, that's where they're headed, to the promised land. But in the meantime, they need to remember the importance of the ground, the importance of the earth as a source for their sustenance. And so every morning, God has them pick their food up off the ground. The second reason is this. How many of you are familiar with the word humility? I didn't say how many of you are humble. I didn't ask you to define humility. I just said how many of you have heard that word. Yes, humility. We talk about it a lot here in church. It's one of those kind of churchy words, if you will. Humility, quite literally, derives from the Latin humus, which means, guess what? Earth, ground. And so quite literally, when someone is humble, they are close to the ground. This is why humble and humility have come to be associated with being lowly or being low. One of the key ways in which we demonstrate humility is by bowing down, by getting lower. You see this especially with pack animals like dogs. When one dog submits to another dog, they get lower, right? And so this is the other reason that I think God has the Israelites collect their food off the ground. He's reminding them that you also need to depend upon me. I'm the one who will provide you with everything that you need for today and sometimes tomorrow. In fact, God is such a giving and wonderful God that God says, I'm not only going to provide you with food and sustenance for the day, I'm also going to give you a day off. A day in which you don't have to go and harvest. A day in which you don't have to bend over to the ground and pick up your food. A day in which you don't have to work, but rather can celebrate the gift of what I have given you. The Bible has a word for that. It's Shabbat, or Sabbath. Rest. It's again a reminder for us that God gives us exactly enough of what we need for today. And every once in a while, for tomorrow, too. But we as a people have lost some of that connection when it comes to food. Over a century ago, the vast majority of Americans, no matter what other profession they practiced, also practiced farming. As of 2010, 0.5%, that's less than 1 million people in the 2010 census, identified their profession as farming. If you were to ask an elementary school child where their food comes from, you're going to get answers like the grocery store, the convenience store, McDonald's, the school cafeteria. Most people don't have any idea where their food comes from, what it takes to actually produce it. Here's another fun fact for you folks. Did you know that most of the food in the grocery store where you shopped traveled 1,500 miles to get there? Let's say you travel 5 miles one way to the grocery store. That's a 10-mile round trip. That means you have to go to the grocery store 150 times to travel as many miles as the food that's in the store traveled to get to you. And yet we're surrounded by fields. We're surrounded by crop production. We're surrounded by animals and farmers. We've lost our connection with the land because we're no longer the ones who have to go out and bend down to the ground and pick it up. We're no longer the ones who till and harvest. Now, some of you have gardens like I do. Really, I should say like my wife does, because she does all of the hard work. I just get to enjoy the produce that comes out of it. And that's a good and wonderful thing. A story that really, I think, brings it all together is this. Some years ago in New Jersey, a public school decided that they wanted to demonstrate to kids where things came from. So they found a local dairy and they got a cow. And they brought a cow into school and they set it up in a nice thing. And they had a nice thing that told the kids, this is where your milk comes from, right? Trying to educate them, trying to get them to understand where things come from. Milk sales in the cafeteria plummeted that next month. They were skeeved out. Oh my gosh, milk comes from an animal and not from a carton? It's because we've gotten to the point where we don't really even ask about the things we put in our mouth. What is this? Or where did it come from? One of my favorite comedians these days is Jim Gaffigan. And if you've ever watched Jim Gaffigan, he has a lot of bits on food. What you might even call a food comic. But one of his most well-known bits is on that perennial favorite, something I ate a lot for lunch as a kid, Hot Pockets. Hot Pockets. Any of you ever eat those, right? As Jim Gaffigan says, I've never eaten a Hot Pocket and said, I feel great. Usually it's more like I eat a Hot Pocket and I say, I'm going to die. He said, who came up with this thing? Let's fill a Pop-Tart with some nasty meat. And if we're honest, he gets us to laugh at it, but the truth is that's effectively the sort of things that we're putting in our mouths. And we wonder then why our bodies don't feel so great. As Jim says, my back hurts. Because we aren't asking what it is that we're putting inside of ourselves. We're not paying attention to where it comes from. We're not really thinking about food as a gift from God, something bounteously given, something that must be worked for, something that is given not only to sustain us, not only to keep our engines running, as it were, but also given to us for pleasure and as a means by which we can share fellowship with others. This disconnect from the ground in harvesting our food has also kept us disconnected from the spiritual aspects of our lives. Because we haven't asked ourselves what it is or where it comes from when it comes to the spiritual things that we put into ourselves. We've neglected to understand the spiritual component of feeding and eating. And so when Jesus gives us this petition in the Lord's Prayer, he says, when you pray, pray this way, give us this day our daily bread. He invites us not only into a prayer for God to provide the physical needs of today, but also for God to provide our spiritual sustenance. After all, the bread of life is nothing less than Jesus Christ himself. And yet, how often do we starve ourselves, neglecting to come into the presence of Christ through prayer, through the reading of Scripture, through joining together in Bible study, through sitting around the table in fellowship together, through shared work in service, through simply being more aware that God is near to us, has come near to us in Jesus Christ. As John Wesley said, the best of all is God is with us. Emmanuel, the Scriptures say. And yet we let the busyness of our lives and the desire to keep up with the Joneses, or at the very least keep up with the Bills, or keep up with the latest Netflix binge, keep us from truly filling ourselves with that spiritual sustenance which is as necessary as physical sustenance. And so we come to this table today, not so much because we need a little piece of bread and a sip of juice, not because the preacher's a little long-winded this morning and we're ready to go to lunch, but also not just because we think this is somehow a magical place in which we take in the body of Christ, though Christ is certainly present here. The reason we come to this table today, and what binds all of this together, is found in the pronouns of the petition Jesus gives us. The us and the our. For if we truly pray, give us this day our daily bread, then we cannot selfishly pray that prayer. We cannot think only of our own physical needs or of our own spiritual needs. We must think also of those who do not have daily bread for their bodies or for their souls. In fact, to right that emptiness becomes our very duty and purpose in life when we truly pray, give us this day our daily bread. And that is why communion is practiced in the body. That's why we all gather around this table symbolically, to remind us that to pray, give us this day our daily bread, is to go out into the world and to sit around tables, not only with those who can feed themselves, but also with those who have no hope of being fed of their own volition at all. It's not just providing for our physical and spiritual needs, it's also sharing what has been given to us with others. There's a song that my mom used to sing to us when we would wake up in the morning, and it stayed with me every day. And I find that it's a wonderful way for me to be mindful, not only of myself, but also of the needs of others as I go about my day. It goes like this. Good morning, Lord, it's a beautiful day. Good morning, Lord, I'm going your way. Open my eyes and let me see someone who needs a friend like me. I know that I can surely be loving, caring, always sharing. Good morning, Lord, it's a beautiful day. Good morning, Lord.